Move on. So, our viewers last week, we shared with you a story about migrant workers at the Irwin County Detention Center in rural Georgia, where people were subjected to forced and unwanted sterilizations. A whistleblower filed a report on behalf of nurse. I'm sorry, a whistleblower report was filed on behalf of Nurse Dawn Wooten, a former employee of the center, claiming an alarming rate of hysterectomies performed on Spanish-speaking women who she and other nurses feared did not understand what they were undergoing or that they were lied to. Wooten claimed the doctor, who has since been identified as gynecologist Dr. Mahindra Amin, was so notorious performing these procedures that Wooten referred to him in her report as the uterus collector. This was in addition to poorly protecting migrant workers from COVID. So let me share a quick video of Dr. and Nurse Wooten.
I've been nursing at Irwin County Detention Center for the past 9 months this time go around. Begin to see the living conditions that they were in, things not being sanitized, coming to work, not having the proper PPE. I was told not to tell officers that there were detainees that they dealt with day in and day out that were positive. I was symptomatic. Doctor's excuse that said stay home until your symptoms resolve. I was told to come to work. I was told that when they bring immigrants in, that they were a head count for pay. And I had several detained women on numerous occasions that would come to me and say, Miss Wooten, I had a hysterectomy. Why? I had no answers as to why they had those procedures. And one lady walked up to me here this last time around between October of 19 until July the 2nd. And she said, what is he? Is he the uterus collector? Does he collect uteruses? And I asked her, what does she mean? And she says, everybody that I talked to has had a hysterectomy. And you just don't know what to say.
So tonight we have a special guest joining our show to share some truth with you. I'd like to welcome Attorney Reverend Kimberly Peyton Jones to the show.
Hello.
Hello, Kimberly.
Hey, Kimberly, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Good. Thank
Lizzie,
you for
would you
having me.
like Lizzie, would you like to
Thank you for
introduce?
being here. Yes, I would love to introduce Kimberly. So Kimberly is a DC native. And so in talking to Kimberly today, we found out that although we did not go to the same high school or elementary school or junior high school, we have a lot of the same friends. So we have familiar background as it relates to that. But let me just give, the audience, Kimberly, before we allow you to tell us why you're here and how you relate to this story, let me just give the audience a little bit of background about you. So you are the founding minister of Halo, a community ministry serving South Atlanta, and you are licensed and ordained at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, where you were an active member for over 10 years. Some of your community work includes serving as co-chair of the Advocacy Committee for the Georgia-Alabama chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and servicing undocumented youth in immigration court through the Attorney of the Day program. You are also the president of the South Atlanta Civic League. You served as chair for the Judicial and Public Office Academy of the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, and you also served as a member of the advisory board of the Georgia Lawyers for the Arts. Kimberly has earned her BA at the College of William and Mary, her law degree from Georgetown University here in Washington, D.C., where you taught high school students street law and represented juveniles in criminal court. You were also a Congressional Black Caucus intern, a public interest law scholar, and was awarded the Juvenile Justice Advocacy Award. So welcome to the show, Kimberly. Thank you so much for joining us.
Quite a resume.
Quite a resume, and we are so blessed to have you here. So please tell us a little bit, in your words, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started working with immigrants.
Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in DC, and I grew up in a neighborhood which at the time was very international. I grew up in Mount Pleasant, but like right on the cusp of Mount Pleasant and Adams Morgan. And back when I was living there, it was very, very international. I had friends who were from El Salvador, Guatemala, Peru, everywhere. We would walk to school and there would be the building where the Koreans lived, the other building where the people from the Caribbean lived. So I just kind of always grew up in a very international environment. And when I was in school, I would always say I wanted to go into international law. I didn't really know what that was and what it meant, but I think because I had that lifelong interest, and then like yourself, Lizzie, I like to travel, and I studied abroad, and so immigration just seemed a natural part of my practice.
Okay. And so, what is it exactly that you do? You're currently based in Atlanta, correct?
Yes,
And so, what
yes,
is
I'm,
it
I'm, I'm
exactly?
currently. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So yeah, I'm based in Atlanta. I have my own practice, and a part of my practice is devoted to immigration, and so I represent people in a variety of matters regarding their immigration status, from asylum to people who are currently facing deportation, and people who maybe got married and want to get their spouse over here. So just a variety of immigration matters.
And so, how did you get involved into the current hot topic? And I know there were some things that you wanted to clarify about what is going on with the whistleblowers allegations and what's being alleged that is happening to a lot of the immigrants that are at this particular detention center.
Okay, well, I think there has been a lot of energy around the hysterectomies and a lot of focus on forced sterilization and eugenics. And that's a part of it, but it's not the largest part of it. To me, this is about commodifying the bodies of vulnerable women. We're talking about women, we're talking about women of color, we're talking about women with no legal immigration status, and we're talking about women who are detained, so they are in very, very vulnerable positions. And so what is happening is that you have this Dr. Amin, who is taking advantage of them by giving them unauthorized surgeries. Among those surgeries have been some hysterectomies. There have also been people having their parts of their fallopian tubes cut off, but there's just been other surgeries involving women's reproductive organs that he has essentially lied to them about and coerced them into having.
So if I'm
So
clear,
I,
I'm sorry.
mhm.
So if I'm clear, you're saying that these are not necessarily forced hysterectomies or forced um, surgeries. It's more that they've been tricked into them, or that they've been um, misled in some way to have them. Is that what? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the way I got involved in this, I had a client who is wanting to remain anonymous because of what
Understood.
she's witnessed with ICE and retaliation, where women have spoken out and been subsequently deported. There was another woman who spoke out, and ICE officers beat her up in front of other people. So, there is this retaliation for people who speak out. But I became involved with this. My client was arrested for a very minor charge. And had it been, she had gotten into an argument with her sister called the police, her sister had her citizenship, and my client was undocumented. Now, had it been one of us, we would have gotten arrested, gone in front of the judge, gotten a very nominal bail, or been let out on our own recognizance, and probably eventually got those criminal charges dismissed. Now, in her case, we were able to get the criminal charges dismissed. She was charged with simple battery, which could just mean you push somebody, it can mean you put your finger in somebody's face, or simple battery. And it was her sister. So her criminal charges were dismissed. She was detained at the end of September of 2018, and we had her criminal charges dismissed in early January. It was a little delayed because there's time for them to assign a prosecutor, and then we ran into the holidays, but they were ultimately dismissed. Unfortunately, Georgia is a very tough state on immigration, and so the judge initially wouldn't release her on bond. The immigration judge wouldn't initially release her on bond because she had this pending criminal charge. But once it was dismissed, I went back with a new motion for a bond redetermination, saying, listen, her criminal charges are gone. So there are two things that you have to prove. One, that you don't have any criminal records, you're not a danger to society, and that you have strong ties to the United States. So in her case, she had no criminal charges. She has children who are U.S. citizens. Both of her parents are green card holders, and we just mentioned that she has a sister who's a citizen. She has a work history, and she was actually enrolled in college at the time. She was able to present her tax record. So we're showing that she has these strong ties to the U.S., but the judge simply would not let her out. And so she ultimately ended up being detained for a year and a half.
Wow.
So in the course of that time that she was detained, she had, it's crazy, right? And I think when she first, she's in her 20s and she has small children. So she literally did not see her children for a year and a half. But when she first got processed in, she had alerted the ICE officers that she had a Mirena IUD that needed to be taken out because it had been there for about 3 years and it was just time for it to be taken out, and it was starting to slip and it was uncomfortable. So she told them that as soon as she was processed in. She did not get treatment to get her IUD removed until July of 2019.
Good Lord.
She was detained at the end of September of 2018 and did not get this IUD removed until July of 2017. Now, this is despite numerous requests. She told them that she was being processed, and this is despite numerous requests, written, oral, and they just wouldn't treat her.
Wow.
When she finally went to see the gynecologist, it was Dr. Amin, and he took the IUD out, which is, takes like a minute or two just to take it out.
Yep.
And he said, you want to get a pap smear? And she said, yeah, let me get a pap smear. It's been some time. And he gives her a pap smear, gives her an exam, and says, hey, I found these cysts on your ovaries. He's like, you have some smaller ones. I'm not really worried about that, but you have one that's the size of a golf ball, and it needs to be removed, or you're going to have some very severe health complications. And so she said, okay. She was a little nervous. She was like, okay, well, what will happen? And he explained to her that it was going to be a very simple outpatient surgery that would take place in his office, because she was at his office. He said it would take place in his office, and he would just drain the cysts, and that would be the end of it. So she agreed to it, thinking that it was this health issue. And so she came back. About 2 weeks later, she was being transported in a van, shackled, and at this point, be mindful that she had no pending criminal charges.
Shackled?
And they would shackle her every time she went to the doctor. And she had no criminal charges. And really, what people don't understand is that immigration violations aren't necessarily criminal. They're often civil. And in her case,
I was going to ask.
She didn't come here illegally. She came here as a minor with her parents, and she overstayed her visa. So she didn't enter the country illegally. She overstayed her visa through no choice of her own, because she came as a minor with her parents. Mm-hmm. And so that's a civil violation, but yet and still she is detained and being treated like a criminal, as are many people who are caught up in this immigration system.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so what, sure. What are what are the rules for detainees? What are the rules for detentions like that? What are they being detained for in general? Or what are they intended? I'm sorry, let me ask this. What are they intended to be detained for? What is a detention center supposed to do versus what they actually are doing?
Well, it's supposed to be like any other place where you're detained. Either you're awaiting trial, or in this case, they're awaiting to be deported. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens practically is that, particularly in Georgia, where this was, is that Georgia has a very, very low rate of granting people asylum. They've been sued by the ACLU. So most of the time, if you end up detained, the odds are against you, that you're more likely than not going to be deported. A lot of times people choose to take voluntary departure so they can just leave and hurry up and get on with the process.
Yep.
But they're usually awaiting trial or waiting deportation. And so she was, she had been through trial, and we were going through the asylum process, and we were, working on relief for her. And so the day that she was going to get her cyst drained, she's in the van with another woman who the doctor has told has cancer in her uterus. And the woman was like, "Oh yeah, we're going to go to the hospital." And my client was like, "Oh, I'm not going to the hospital." And she's like, "Yes, we are. We're on the way to the hospital." And she's like, "Well, maybe you're going to the hospital, but I'm not going to the hospital. I'm just going to his office to get, this cyst drain. It's not a big deal." Well, lo and behold, she ends up at the hospital, and she's like, "Well, what am I doing at the hospital?" And they tell her, like, you're going to have to get this cyst, and we're going to have to put you under general anesthesia, and we're going to have to cut you. And she was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, this is not what I was expecting." She's like, "Well, can I have some time?" Right. She's like, "Can I have some time to talk this over with my attorney or think about it for a day or two?" And the nurse was like, "Well, you can do that if you want to, but if you do that, you're going to be putting yourself in danger. This cyst can burst and cause you all kinds of problems, and it'll
So she was
probably take a
pressured.
long." Yeah, she was like, "It'll probably take a long time for ICE to approve the surgery if they do it at all, because if you're electing not to do it, then that means that you're not really having that many issues."
They almost gave her no other option.
Right. Didn't give
Okay.
her any, even in a normal course of medical care. If someone tells you have a cyst, they might say it would be better if you have it removed, but if you don't want to go through with it, here are some options. There was
Mhm.
never any options or anything given to her, and she had
Mhm.
this enormous pressure placed on her. And be mindful, this is a woman who has had sharp pains and had experienced the discomfort of an IUD that was, not positioned properly, and had to deal with that for 8 months. So she is aware of how long ICE can take to
Mhm.
approve medical
Mhm.
procedures. So she believes, like, if I don't do this, I could have this thing burst inside of me and not get treatment, because that's been her experience.
Yeah.
And so she agreed to have it done when she said, "But give me a copy of whatever I'm signing." And so they said they would. The anesthesiologist comes in, and she's like, "Well, why am I going under general anesthesia?" She didn't realize that she was going to be placed under it. And he was like, "Believe me, you don't want to be awake for this surgery." And so she was very nervous, and he was about to treat her, but she was like, "You do know that I'm allergic to penicillin?" And he said, "Oh, really?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm glad that you told me, because I was about to, have in the mix." And so
They didn't
luckily,
ask her. They didn't ask
right.
her. Lord.
I mean,
Well,
that's
it's
standard. That's the standard thing every time you go to the hospital.
yeah, they say, "Are you allergic to any medicines?" Didn't ask her. She just volunteered. And so she has the surgery. She doesn't see the doctor before she goes into surgery, doesn't see the doctor after she comes out of surgery. She wakes up, she's very upset, she's crying, and she's had this surgery. She goes back into the population, sleeping on a hard bed, sleeping on the top bunk. She asked if she could be placed on a bottom bunk. They didn't want to let her do it. They weren't giving her the proper medication afterwards, the proper pain medication. And she ultimately ended up getting an infection in her ovaries, for which
Oh
she was
no.
supposed to antibiotics, but they weren't giving her the antibiotics. And
Mm.
she complained to the doctor, "They're not giving me the medicine I'm supposed to have." And so he did call and say, "Hey, she really needs to get this medicine." And they ultimately gave it to her. But she was having a lot of pain. And one thing that she has a lot of energy around and is upset about is that throughout the surgery, her stomach was cut. And she had what, we would call an outie on her navel, but after the surgery, her navel was completely gone. And so it was just kind of a concave hole, which also, kind of made her ask, like, what happened to me? What was done to me when I was under general anesthesia and knocked out? And so, she was complaining about the pain. They weren't cleaning her wounds properly. They weren't giving her the antibiotics. And so in retaliation, the ICE officers are like, "Okay, well, since you're having so many problems, we're going to put you in medical." And going to medical is basically like going to solitary confinement is where they keep people who are on suicide watch. You have no commissary, you have no TV, you can't talk to anyone, you can't take phone calls. And they take her over there, and she's very upset and nervous. And she's like, okay, I'm sorry, like, take me back to general population. And so, she's intimidated into not even being able to voice what her medical problems are.
Wow.
So, luckily, I was able to end up getting her out. We had another attorney who came in and who was assisting us with the asylum, and I had done some other things on her case, but I kind of moved away from the case while her asylum was pending.
Mhm.
But I kept in touch with her mom, and I was doing these other visas, and so her mom had reached out to me, and I was like, "Oh, how's she doing?" And she told me that she was still detained, and I could not believe that she was still detained after a year and a half. And so I said, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. I was like, I'm going to pretend like this is my sister, I'm going to pretend like this is somebody in my family, and I'm just going to do whatever I can to get her out of here.
Yeah.
And which entailed me like making calls to all kinds of people, calling everybody in ICE. And this was right when the pandemic hit, and Georgia shut down. So I know, like, there was one ICE officer who cooperated with me. It was like, send me, the fact that her charges got dismissed, come down here and meet with me. This is the beginning of the pandemic. I had my mask on, my gloves. I had her whole huge file with everything in there. And so he ultimately agreed to release her, and he released her on her own cognizance. And, even now, she hasn't been back to the doctor. She's going back this week, but she's been experiencing a lot of pain, particularly close to her menstrual cycle. But, the thing is, she is an undocumented immigrant. She doesn't have insurance.
Let me
She
ask you
doesn't
this
have
question real
access.
quick. So,
Yeah.
does she still have to see the same Dr. Amin, or is she seeing someone else?
No, she's out. She's been released, and
She's
she's
been
going to
released, so she
see.
is seeing someone else. Okay.
Yeah, because
But I
and
just
so
want
here's the kicker. I had a friend of mine who's an OBGYN review her medical files.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, through our American Immigration Lawyers Association, have some doctors who are working with us who have reviewed her medical files. And what they have said is that her surgery was completely medically unnecessary, because in addition to having this, cyst removed, they also did a DNC on her, which she had no
Wow.
idea was going to.
For what?
And it was just completely medically unnecessary. And they said that there was no ultrasound that showed any cyst being the size of a golf ball, and that the cyst that she did have was a regular follicular cyst that every woman gets every month when you ovulate. And so
Yeah.
the even worse part about it is that there are other women, and they've reviewed their medical files, and they said that it's the exact same thing. It's like you could take one medical file and replace it with the other, because he's putting the
So he's doing
exact
it
same
over
thing
and over again.
and doing
this is
the cyst removal on cysts that don't need to be
And it's
removed.
to make money, right? So he can earn more money, right? Yeah.
this
Does
is
he?
Right,
just
because
so
they would.
diabolical. It's so diabolical because, like you said, these are procedures. These are invasive medical procedures that are unnecessary and that are causing extreme harm. But also, if you think about the main story, like, remember, and you clarified some of this last week, the story was about hysterectomies. And then as it started to come out, okay, well, no, it's not really hysterectomies in the majority of the stories. Then people turn the page. It's like, okay, well, it's not hysterectomy, so then we don't need to care. There's nothing happening. There's no wrong being done to these women. So let's go on to the next story. Whereas clearly, even though, a uterus hasn't been removed, there is still a lot of medical malpractice and trauma going on here. And that is just so outrageous to me. So,
We have
and
a
as someone who has had, a myomectomy, who's had surgery, I've had my fibroids, removed or what have you, I understand what goes on in these processes. And so to think that people are invading this space for no reason is just, I mean, it's so appalling to me. It's so ridiculous.
is.
You
Let's
know?
get.
And
We
it
have
has
about 3 minutes. Let me just get Rob B and East a quick question here.
So, my question is the hospitals that these women are reporting to for the surgeries and the nursing staff who is supporting the doctor's diagnosis, are they complicit in this whole process, or are they being deceived by Dr. Amin and his misdiagnoses?
Well, at this point, we are suspecting that there were some people who were complicit. Like the nurse who was coercing her into doing it. And my position is this is a man who has already been found to have committed Medicaid fraud and had to pay significant restitution. And so I say my client said when they were all being diagnosed with all these cysts, there were at least 5 people on her pod who had this cyst. This other lady who I mentioned, he said had cancer. When she was released, she went to go get checked, and she did have a hysterectomy, no trace of cancer anywhere. But initially, they were thinking, why does everyone have these cysts? Is it something in the food that they're giving us? Is it something in the water? Not realizing that it was the doctor. And so I say, this man has already been found guilty of Medicaid fraud. Who's approving these charges for these for the surgeries?
Mm-hmm.
If inmate,
Somebody should have noticed a pattern. Somebody should have noticed a pattern.
why is no one saying, hey, there's an awful lot of these surgeries going on, like maybe we need to look a little more closely at this, which to me implies or indicates that there was a lot of people who were complicit in this.
It has to be. East.
And that kind of leads to my question: like, who's following the money? Because I think wherever the money is flowing, that money is flowing to the doctor somehow. And where is that coming from? Who's funding the doctor? Has that been investigated? Are you at liberty to share the
under investigation now? Because there are some things that look a little suspicious where there's relations between people who are in the county who are approving contracts related to the warden of the jail. I don't want to falsely accuse anybody else right now, but all of that is being investigated. And so what it breaks down to is a doctor, I'm just giving examples. Let's say he would receive $100 for an initial visit where he's just pulling out an IUD and like doing an exam. But when he's now doing his surgery, that goes to $15.
Yeah.
And now you're doing this times all these women. You're able to make a whole lot more money.
Make more money. All right, I'm just gonna. Yeah, make it real quick.
He's charged with Medicaid fraud. Do we know why he was allowed to keep his license?
No, we don't know why. He had to pay over $500,000 worth of restitution for the fraud, and there is even some debate about whether or not he was board certified.
All right, I'm gonna just go to the comments real quick online. Almost everyone is saying this is appalling, deeply disturbing. Paulette, Salai, Mike Winter. Jacqueline Robinson says this is what happens when people are dehumanized. It gives the dominant caste carte blanche to do what they want to marginalize people. Katie says, Jesus, is there no help or hope for these women? This is horrible. Rupka was asking, what procedure was the belly button procedure? It was just part of the surgery, right?
Yeah, that was part of the surgery. And that's one of the things we want to figure out, why that kind of incision was needed was made for what was supposed to have happened. And I will just say quickly, we are working, American Immigration Lawyers Association, we're all working really hard. We've testified to Congress. Congress is opening up a formal investigation. We're working to get the women who have had these treatments released and have their deportation stayed at least until the investigation is resolved. So we are working to get justice for these women, in addition to my own.
Then final comments here from Marjorie Lorraine. We need more female providers. It's not difficult to file a complaint against a provider. Look at the back of your insurance card and call the member services that are obligated to investigate. So yeah. So we have to shut it down. But Reverend Jones, if you have any last comments, feel free to share with us.
Well, I just want to say quickly, because I appreciated the fact that you showed the clips of the nurse there and what my client indicated about Nurse Wooten. She's a hero. She was brave enough to speak out about this. But she said when they were in there, she was the only nurse that was always following up with them to make sure they had their medication. She would stay late to make sure they got their proper treatment. And like, she was the only person that showed them any compassion while they were in there. So, we thank her for her bravery and the courage to speak out about what was going on in there.
Yeah, she's amazing. I mean, we need more people like that.
Well, and I was just gonna say, also thank you too for your fortitude and for just keeping up with this story and representing these women in their struggle. I mean, obviously these are horrible atrocities that are taking place, and that a lot of people in this country turn a blind eye to because the victims are vulnerable. The victims can't speak up for themselves, and like you said, a lot of them are undocumented. So why would we care? Well, we are all humans. We should care. So thank you so much for being an advocate for these women and giving them a voice and hope.
And
well, thank you all for having me. I look forward to seeing more episodes of your show.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back to get an update on this as well. So we'll keep in touch with you because we want to kind of know what comes out of this, especially when we comes back with the investigation. So,
right,
we'll definitely keep in touch. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Kimberly.
All right. All right, guys.
Lot of information.
That was a lot. It's a pretty appalling story, really.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the questions I should have asked her was, I'm curious how old her client was. I don't think we got that from her. But
I think she said, I think she's in her 20s. I think she's in her 20s,
yeah.
And has young kids, is what I got from that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's what she said.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move on to our hot topics.